My friends, seekers of inner truth and wanderers in the vast terrain of the psyche, listen closely, for what you call discipline is not merely an act of control, but a sacred dialogue between the conscious will and the unconscious depths. Self-discipline is not the suppression of desire, it is the transformation of desire. It is the alchemical fire through which chaos is forged into order and instinct is refined into purpose. The undisciplined man is not free. He is enslaved, pulled like a puppet by impulses he neither understands nor governs. True freedom begins not with indulgence, but with mastery. Within each of you resides a battlefield. On one side stands the higher self, the archetype of wholeness, clarity, and purpose. On the other side lurks the shadow, seductive, impulsive, whispering of ease, comfort, and immediate gratification. Self-discipline is the conscious choice to listen not to the loudest voice, but to the wisest one. To discipline oneself is to confront the shadow daily. It is to look into the mirror of your own weaknesses and say, "I see you, and I will not be ruled by you." This is not an act of cruelty toward the self, but an act of profound respect, for only through discipline can the fragmented psyche begin to unify. The modern world teaches you to avoid discomfort, to anesthetize pain, to chase pleasure endlessly. But the psyche does not grow in comfort. It expands through tension, through resistance, through conscious suffering. Discipline is the bridge between who you are and who you are capable of becoming. You must understand this. Every act of discipline is an act of self-creation. Each time you resist the pull of laziness, each time you choose effort over ease, you carve a new structure into your psyche. You are, in essence, sculpting your own soul. Discipline, when truly understood, is not an external force imposed upon the self, nor is it a rigid system of control designed to suppress the vitality of the human spirit. It is something far more profound, far more intimate. It is the quiet emergence of inner authority, the moment when the individual ceases to be ruled by chaos and instead becomes the conscious architect of his own existence. Most people move through life in a fragmented state, though they are rarely aware of it. Their actions are dictated by shifting moods, fleeting desires, unconscious fears, and the invisible weight of habits formed long ago. They believe themselves to be making choices, yet in truth they are being moved, like leaves carried by a restless wind. What they call freedom is often nothing more than submission to impulse. What they call comfort is often a subtle form of enslavement. Inner authority begins where this illusion ends. It is born in a moment of realization, sometimes quiet, sometimes violent, when one sees clearly that to live without discipline is to live unconsciously. It is the recognition that the self, left unchecked, does not naturally evolve toward greatness, but instead gravitates toward ease, repetition, and familiarity. The psyche, in its undisciplined state, seeks safety above all else, even if that safety comes at the cost of growth, meaning, and truth. To establish inner authority is to interrupt this automatic pattern. It is to step between stimulus and response and declare, "I will decide," not the body, not the emotion, not the fear, but the conscious self. This moment, though it may seem small, is revolutionary, for in that instant you are no longer a passive participant in your life. You become its author, but this authority does not arise without resistance. The psyche is not unified. It is a complex landscape of competing forces, desires that pull in opposite directions, fears that distort perception, and unconscious patterns that resist change. When you attempt to assert discipline, you will feel this resistance immediately. A part of you will rebel. It will whisper that you are tired, that you deserve rest, that you can begin tomorrow. It will rationalize avoidance, justify delay, and cloak weakness in the language of self-care. This is the voice that has ruled you for years, and discipline, as inner authority, is the act of no longer obeying it. This does not mean silencing the voice through force or hatred. That would only deepen the division within the psyche. Instead, it means recognizing it for what it is, a fragment of the self that seeks comfort and fears transformation. You listen to it, you understand it, but you do not surrender to it. You acknowledge its presence without granting it control. In this way, discipline becomes an act of integration rather than suppression. You begin to realize that authority over the self is not about domination, but about alignment. It is about bringing the scattered parts of your psyche into a coherent order, where each impulse is seen, understood, and placed in its proper position. The conscious will does not destroy desire, it directs it. It does not eliminate fear, it moves forward despite it. This is the essence of inner authority, the capacity to act in accordance with your highest understanding, even when every lower impulse urges you to do otherwise. Consider how rare this is. Most individuals act only when they feel like acting. Their productivity depends on motivation, their consistency depends on mood, and their commitments dissolve the moment discomfort arises. They are not in control of their lives. They are in negotiation with them. And in this negotiation, the weaker voice, the voice of effort, discipline, and long-term vision, almost always loses. To cultivate inner authority is to end this negotiation. It is to establish a principle within yourself that does not bend to temporary states. You decide who you are, and then you act accordingly, regardless of how you feel in the moment. You create a standard, and you meet it, not because it is easy, but because it is true. This is where discipline transforms from a task into an identity. You are no longer someone who tries to be disciplined. You are someone who operates under a self-defined code. Your actions are not reactions. They are expressions of that code. You wake up not because you feel motivated, but because you have decided that this is what you do. You work not because it is pleasant, but because it aligns with the person you have chosen to become. Over time, this consistency reshapes the psyche. What was once difficult becomes natural. What once required effort becomes automatic. The voice of resistance grows quieter, not because it has been silenced, but because it has been understood and integrated. You no longer argue with yourself as often, because there is less internal conflict. The hierarchy within your psyche has been established. The conscious will leads, and the rest follows. Yet this process is not linear, nor is it ever complete. There will be moments, many of them, when the old patterns resurface. Days when fatigue weakens your resolve, when doubt clouds your clarity, when the comfort of old habits calls to you with renewed intensity. In these moments, inner authority is tested, not in grand gestures, but in small, quiet decisions that no one else will see. Do you continue, or do you retreat? Each time you choose to continue, you reinforce your authority. Each time you retreat, you weaken it. This is not a moral judgment, but a psychological reality. The psychological reality. The psyche learns through repetition. It becomes what it repeatedly does. And so, the path of discipline is not about perfection, but about persistence, about choosing, again and again, to return to your center. There is also a deeper dimension to this authority, one that extends beyond productivity and achievement. When you are governed by impulse, you are easily manipulated by other people, by societal expectations, by the endless distractions of the modern world. Your attention is captured, your time is consumed, and your energy is scattered. You live reactively, responding to whatever demands your focus in the moment. But when you possess inner authority, this changes. You decide what deserves your attention. You choose where your energy goes. You are not pulled in every direction because you are anchored within yourself. This creates a sense of stability, of groundedness, that cannot be shaken by external chaos. You become, in a very real sense, self-governance. And with this self-governance comes a profound form of freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, whenever you want. That is the freedom of the undisciplined, and it often leads to emptiness. But the freedom to pursue what is meaningful, to commit fully to your path, to act in alignment with your deeper values without being derailed by momentary distractions. This is a higher form of liberty, one that is earned, not given. It is important to understand that this authority does not make life easier in the conventional sense. You will still experience difficulty, uncertainty, and struggle. In fact, you may encounter them more often because you are no longer avoiding them. You are stepping toward challenges that others would rather escape. But your relationship to these challenges changes. You no longer see them as obstacles to your comfort, but as necessary elements of your growth. You face them with a sense of purpose, because you know that each act of discipline strengthens your capacity to live consciously. You are not seeking ease, you are seeking evolution, and in this pursuit, something remarkable begins to happen. A quiet confidence emerges, not the loud, performative confidence of the ego, but a deep, steady trust in yourself. You know that you can rely on your own actions. You know that you will do what you have committed to do. This trust is not built through words or intentions, but through repeated evidence. You have proven to yourself again and again that you are capable of self-governance. This is the foundation of true self-respect. Without discipline, self-respect remains fragile, easily shaken by failure or inconsistency. But with discipline, it becomes stable, rooted in the knowledge that you are aligned with your own standards. You are no longer dependent on external validation because your sense of worth is derived from within. This is why inner authority is so powerful. It transforms not only what you do but who you are. It reorganizes the psyche, establishes clarity, and creates a sense of unity within the self. It allows you to move through life with intention rather than reaction, with purpose rather than drift. And yet, it is not something that can be achieved once and then forgotten. It must be cultivated daily. Each morning presents a new opportunity to assert your authority. Each decision, no matter how small, is a chance to reinforce or weaken it. There are no shortcuts, no moments of permanent arrival. The path of discipline is ongoing, a continuous process of choosing consciousness over unconsciousness. But within this process lies its greatest reward. For as you continue to choose discipline to assert your inner authority, you begin to experience a shift, not just in your actions, but in your very perception of life. What once felt like effort begins to feel like expression. What once felt like restriction begins to feel like alignment. You are no longer forcing yourself to act. You are simply being who you have decided to become, and in that state, discipline is no longer a struggle, it is your nature. Pain is rarely welcomed, yet it is one of the most honest forces you will ever encounter. It does not flatter you, it does not comfort your illusions, and it does not negotiate with your preferences. It arrives uninvited, often at the precise moment when your current way of living can no longer sustain your growth. And though the conscious mind resists it, fears it, avoids it, numbs it, the deeper psyche recognizes something essential within it. Pain is not merely an obstacle, but a teacher. To understand this requires a shift in perception. Most people interpret pain as something meaningless, something to escape as quickly as possible. They see it as a disruption to their happiness, a sign that something has gone wrong, and so they spend their lives constructing elaborate strategies to avoid it, seeking comfort, distraction, and temporary relief wherever they can find it. But in doing so, they unknowingly cut themselves off from one of the most powerful mechanisms of transformation available to them. For pain, in its essence, is a signal. It is the psyche's way of communicating that something within you is misaligned, unresolved, or incomplete. It points toward areas of tension between who you are and who you are becoming, between your current habits and your deeper potential, between the life you are living and the life you are meant to live. Without pain, these tensions would remain invisible. You would continue along the same path, repeating the same patterns, never questioning whether they serve you. Pain interrupts this repetition. It forces awareness. When you experience emotional pain, whether it is failure, rejection, loss, or internal conflict, it disrupts the illusion of stability. It exposes the cracks in your self-concept, the weaknesses in your structures, the inconsistencies in your beliefs. It demands that you pay attention, and in that demand lies its teaching. But the lesson is not given freely. It must be extracted. This is where most people falter. They feel the pain, but they do not engage with it. Instead, they react to it. They seek immediate relief, turning to distractions, addictions, or avoidance. They numb themselves with entertainment, with substances, with endless activity. They do anything to escape the discomfort, not realizing that in escaping the pain they are also escaping the lesson, and so the pain returns. Again and again, often in different forms, but always carrying the same underlying message. Until it is understood, it will persist, not as punishment, but as persistence, the psyche's refusal to let you remain unconscious. To allow pain to teach you, you must first stop running from it. You must turn toward it. This does not mean seeking suffering for its own sake, nor does it mean romanticizing hardship. It means developing the capacity to remain present with discomfort, to experience it fully without immediately trying to eliminate it. It means asking, in the midst of pain, not how do I escape this, but what is this trying to show me? This question changes everything. It transforms pain from an enemy into a guide. When you begin to explore your pain, you discover that it is rarely random. It is connected to something deeper, an expectation that was not met, a belief that was challenged, a fear that was triggered, a part of yourself that was threatened or exposed. By tracing the pain back to its source, you begin to uncover the underlying structures of your psyche. For example, consider the pain of failure. On the surface, it may feel like disappointment, frustration, or even shame, but beneath that surface there may be a deeper belief that your worth is tied to your success, that failure defines you, that you must be perfect to be accepted. The pain is not just about the event itself, it is about what the event reveals about your inner world. If you avoid this pain, you avoid confronting that belief. But if you face it, you have the opportunity to question it, to challenge it, to transform it. In this way, pain becomes a catalyst for growth. It reveals what must be changed. It highlights where you are rigid, where you are fragile, where you are clinging to outdated patterns or false assumptions. It shows you the limits of your current understanding and pushes you beyond them. This process, however, is not comfortable. Growth rarely is. To learn from pain, you must be willing to endure it, to sit with the discomfort long enough for its meaning to emerge. This requires patience, awareness, and a certain degree of courage. For when you face pain directly, you are not only confronting the external situation, but also the internal structures that give it power. You are confronting yourself, and this is where discipline becomes essential. Without discipline, the natural tendency is to retreat, to seek relief, to distract, to avoid. But with discipline, you can remain present. You can hold your attention steady, even in the face of discomfort. You can resist the urge to escape, and instead engage with the experience. This engagement is what allows transformation to occur. It is what turns pain into wisdom. Over time, as you practice this, your relationship with pain begins to change. It no longer feels like something purely negative, something to be feared at all costs. Instead, it becomes something meaningful, something that, while still difficult, is recognized as part of the process of becoming. You begin to see patterns. You notice that the moments of greatest growth in your life often follow periods of intense discomfort, that the times when you were forced to confront your limitations were the times when you expanded beyond them, that the pain you once resented was, in many ways, necessary. This realization does not eliminate pain, but it reframes it. It gives it context, and with context comes a sense of purpose. You understand that pain is not there to break you, but to reshape you, not to destroy your sense of self, but to refine it. It strips away illusions, challenges, assumptions, and forces you to rebuild on a more solid foundation. In this sense, pain is deeply connected to truth. It reveals what is real and what is not. When something you believed in collapses, when an expectation is shattered, when a part of your identity is challenged, the resulting pain is the process of adjustment, the psyche reorganizing itself in response to new information. It is the friction between your old understanding and the emerging reality. If you resist this process, you remain stuck, but if you engage with it, you evolve. There is also a deeper, almost paradoxical aspect to pain. It not only reveals weakness, but also strength. When you endure pain consciously, when you face it, learn from it, and move through it, you discover capacities within yourself that you did not know existed. You realize that you are more resilient, more adaptable, more capable than you previously believed. This realization builds confidence, not the superficial confidence that comes from success or external validation, but a deeper confidence that comes from experience. You know that you can handle difficulty because you have done so before. You trust yourself, not because life is easy, but because you have learned how to navigate its challenges. This trust is invaluable. It allows you to approach future pain with a different mindset, not with fear, but with a certain readiness. You understand that while the experience may be difficult, it is also an opportunity to learn, to grow, to refine your understanding of yourself and the world, and so, instead of avoiding pain, you begin to accept it as part of the journey. You do not seek it unnecessarily, but you no longer run from it when it arises. You meet it with awareness, with curiosity, with a willingness to engage. You allow it to teach you. This does not mean that all pain is meaningful in the same way. Some pain is the result of circumstances beyond your control, loss, tragedy, events that cannot be undone. Even here, however, there is something to be learned, not necessarily about the event itself, but about your response to it, about your capacity to endure, to adapt, to find meaning even in the face of suffering. This is perhaps the most profound lesson pain can offer. That meaning is not given, it is created. Even in the most difficult experiences, you have the ability to shape your response, to decide how you will interpret and integrate what has happened. You can allow pain to make you bitter, closed and withdrawn, or you can allow it to deepen your understanding, to expand your empathy, to strengthen your character. This choice is not always easy. In moments of intense pain, it may not even feel possible, but over time, as you develop awareness and discipline, you begin to see that you are not entirely at the mercy of your experiences. You have a role to play in how they shape. Oh, and this is where the true power of pain as a teacher becomes evident. It does not simply happen to you, it works with you. It presents you with challenges, with tensions, with opportunities for growth, and your task is to engage with these, to extract their meaning, to integrate their lessons into your life. This process is ongoing. There is no final stage where pain disappears completely, where all lessons have been learned. Life continues to present new challenges, new difficulties, new areas for growth, and with each new experience, the opportunity to learn remains. What changes is not the presence of pain, but your relationship to it. You become less reactive, less avoidant, less overwhelmed. You develop the capacity to remain grounded, even in the face of difficulty. You learn to trust the process, to see beyond the immediate discomfort to the deeper transformation that is taking place. And in this trust, something shifts. Pain loses its power to intimidate you. It becomes something you can face, something you can work with, something that, while still challenging, is no longer overwhelming. You recognize it as part of the path, as a necessary component of growth. In this way, pain becomes not just a teacher, but a guide. It points you toward the areas of your life that require attention, that hold the potential for transformation. It directs you toward the work that needs to be done, the patterns that need to be examined, the aspects of yourself that need to be integrated. And if you are willing to listen, truly listen, it will lead you forward, not along the path of least resistance, but along the path of greatest development. For it is through difficulty, through challenge, through the willingness to face what is uncomfortable, that you expand. It is through pain that you are shaped, refined, and ultimately transformed. And so, rather than asking how to eliminate pain from your life, perhaps the more meaningful question is this: what is this pain trying to teach me? For within that question lies the beginning of understanding, and within that understanding lies the potential for profound growth. What you do once may pass unnoticed, like a ripple dissolving into the surface of a vast ocean, but what you do repeatedly becomes something else entirely. It becomes structure, it becomes pattern, it becomes in time the invisible architecture of your psyche. Repetition is not merely a behavioral phenomenon, it is a psychological force of immense power. It shapes perception, reinforces identity, and determines the boundaries of what you believe is possible. The human being is not formed in moments of intensity, but in cycles of recurrence. It is not the occasional act of discipline or failure that defines you, but the patterns you return to, again and again, often without conscious awareness. To understand repetition is to understand how the self is constructed. The psyche in its natural state seeks efficiency. It does not want to expend unnecessary energy making decisions at every moment, and so it learns, it observes what you do repeatedly, and begins to automate it. What was once a conscious effort becomes unconscious habit. What required intention becomes instinct. This process is neither good nor bad in itself. It is simply the mechanism through which the psyche organizes experience. But here lies the danger. The psyche does not distinguish between what is beneficial and what is destructive. It simply reinforces what is repeated. If you consistently engage in behaviors that move you toward growth, those behaviors become easier, more natural, more integrated. But if you repeatedly indulge in avoidance, distraction, or self-sabotage, those patterns become just as deeply embedded. In this way, repetition becomes destiny, not in a mystical sense, but in a psychological one. Your future is not determined by your intentions, but by your patterns. What you do consistently shapes who you become, and who you become determines what you are capable of achieving. Yet most individuals remain unaware of this process. They focus on isolated moments, on bursts of motivation, on occasional successes, on temporary failures, without recognizing the deeper rhythm beneath them. They believe that change requires a dramatic shift, a sudden transformation, a single decision that will alter everything. But the psyche does not transform in this way. It changes slowly through accumulation. Each repetition is like a small imprint, barely noticeable on its own, but powerful when layered over time. Like drops of water carving stone, the effect is gradual, almost imperceptible, until one day the shape has changed entirely. This is why discipline must be rooted in repetition. Not in intensity, not in perfection, but in consistency. When you act in alignment with your goals once, it is a decision. When you act in alignment repeatedly, it becomes a pattern, and when that pattern is sustained, it becomes part of your identity. You no longer have to force yourself to act in a certain way, because it is simply what you do. This is the true power of repetition. It transforms effort into nature. Consider the act of waking early, of exercising, of working with focus and intention. At first, these actions feel unnatural. They require willpower, resistance, conscious effort. The psyche resists because it is accustomed to a different pattern, one of comfort, of ease, of minimal exertion. But if you persist, if you repeat these actions consistently, something begins to shift. The resistance diminishes. What once felt difficult becomes manageable. What once required effort becomes routine. And eventually, what once seemed impossible becomes normal. This is not because the action itself has changed, but because the psyche has adapted to it. Repetition has reshaped the internal structure. The same is true in the opposite direction. If you repeatedly choose comfort over challenge, distraction over focus, avoidance over action, those patterns become ingrained. The psyche adapts to them just as readily. It begins to expect them, to rely on them, to default to them, and then, when you attempt to change, you encounter resistance, not because you are incapable, but because you are going against a pattern that has been reinforced over time. This resistance is often misunderstood. People interpret it as a lack of motivation, a lack of discipline, a personal flaw. but in reality it is the natural response of a system that has been conditioned in a particular way. The psyche is simply trying to maintain what it knows. To change this, you must introduce new repetition, not sporadically, not inconsistently, but deliberately and persistently. You must create new patterns that, over time, override the old ones. This is not a quick process. It requires patience, awareness, and a willingness to endure the discomfort of transition. For during this period, you exist between two identities. The old patterns are still present, still exerting their influence, while the new patterns are not yet fully established. You feel the pull in both directions. You may move forward one day and fall back the next. You may question whether change is even possible. But if you continue, if you persist in the repetition of the new behavior, the balance begins to shift. Gradually, the new pattern gains strength. It becomes more familiar, more stable, more integrated. The old pattern loses its hold, not because it has been forcibly removed, but because it is no longer being reinforced. It fades through neglect, while the new pattern grows through repetition. This is how transformation occurs, not through a single act of will, but through sustained engagement. There is also a deeper layer to this process, one that involves identity. The psyche does not simply record what you do, it interprets it. It constructs a narrative about who you are based on your repeated actions. If you consistently act with discipline, the psyche begins to see you as a disciplined person. If you repeatedly avoid responsibility, it begins to see you as unreliable. This identity then reinforces the behavior. You act in ways that are consistent with how you see yourself, and so the cycle continues. Behavior shapes identity, and identity shapes behavior, creating a feedback loop that becomes increasingly difficult to break. This is why small, consistent actions are so powerful. Each time you act in alignment with the person you want to become, you provide evidence for that identity. You strengthen the narrative. You make it more real, and over time this narrative becomes self-sustaining. You no longer have to convince yourself, you believe it. At this point, discipline becomes less about effort and more about expression. You are not forcing yourself to act. You are simply being who you are. But this process requires awareness. Without awareness, repetition becomes unconscious, and unconscious repetition often leads to stagnation. You continue to do what you have always done, not because it serves you, but because it is familiar. You become trapped in cycles that you do not question, patterns that you do not examine. This is where many people remain. They live in repetition, but not in growth. Their days are similar, their actions predictable, their progress limited. They may feel a sense of comfort, but beneath it lies a subtle dissatisfaction, a sense that something is missing, that they are capable of more. This feeling is not accidental. It is the psyche signaling that the current patterns are insufficient. To respond to this signal, you must bring consciousness into your repetition. You must examine your habits, your routines, your daily actions. You must ask yourself whether they are aligned with your goals, your values, your deeper aspirations. And where they are not, you must be willing to change them. This is not easy. It requires disrupting what is comfortable, stepping into the unfamiliar, and tolerating the discomfort that comes with it. But this discomfort is temporary. It is the cost of transformation, and the reward is profound. For when you consciously shape your repetition, you take control of your development. You are no longer drifting, no longer reacting, no longer repeating patterns that do not serve you. You are actively constructing your psyche, building it in alignment with your highest intentions. This is the essence of discipline. It is not about forcing yourself in isolated moments, but about creating a system of repetition that supports your growth. It is about designing your life in such a way that the right actions become the default, the natural choice. Over time, this system becomes self-reinforcing. The more you repeat a behavior, the easier it becomes. The easier it becomes, the more likely you are to continue. And the more you continue, the deeper it is embedded. This is the cycle you must learn to harness, not unconsciously, but deliberately. For repetition will shape your psyche whether you are aware of it or not. The only question is whether it will shape it in a way that leads to growth or in a way that leads to stagnation. You cannot escape repetition, but you can choose it. You can decide what patterns you will reinforce, what behaviors you will repeat, what identity, why I, will build through your actions. You can take what is often an unconscious process and make it conscious, and in doing so, you transform not only what you do, but who you are, for in the end, you are not the sum of your intentions. You are the sum of your repetitions. Motivation is often revered as the sacred spark of action, the invisible force that propels individuals toward greatness, the emotional ignition that transforms intention into movement. It is spoken of as though it were the beginning of all achievement, the necessary precursor to effort, the inner fire one must wait for before stepping forward. Yet this belief, though widespread, is deeply misleading. For motivation, in its true nature, is not a foundation, it is a fluctuation. It rises and falls like a tide, unpredictable and uncontrollable, shaped by forces that lie far beyond conscious command. To depend on it is to build your life upon something inherently unstable, and yet this is precisely what most people do. They wait to feel inspired, to feel ready, to feel aligned with the task before them. They tell themselves that when the moment is right, when the energy is there, when the mood is favorable, they will act. Until then, they remain still, suspended in a state of potential that never quite becomes reality. This is the illusion, the belief that action must be preceded by motivation, when in truth, the relationship often operates in reverse. Motivation is not the cause of action, it is frequently the consequence of it. But this reversal is difficult to accept, because it challenges a deeply ingrained pattern within the psyche. The human mind seeks comfort, and motivation provides a convenient justification for delay. If you are not motivated, you are not ready. If you are not ready, you should wait, and in waiting, you avoid the discomfort of beginning. This avoidance is rare, lie recognized for what it is. It disguises itself as patience, as preparation, as self-awareness. You tell yourself that you are honoring your natural rhythms, that you are being mindful of your state, that you will perform better when the time is right. But beneath these rationalizations lies a simpler truth. You are avoiding resistance, for to act without motivation is to confront resistance directly. It is to begin when you do not feel like beginning, to continue when you would rather stop, to move forward without the emotional support that motivation provides. This requires something far more stable, far more reliable than motivation. It requires discipline. Discipline does not ask how you feel. It does not consult your mood, your energy, or your level of enthusiasm. It operates on a different principle entirely: commitment. It is the decision to act based on what is necessary, rather than what is comfortable. It is the ability to initiate and sustain action in the absence of emotional reinforcement. This is why discipline is often experienced as difficult, not because the actions themselves are inherently unbearable, but because they must be taken without the assistance of motivation. You must create movement without waiting for the internal signal that says, "Now is the time." You must generate momentum from stillness, and this, for many, feels unnatural. The psyche is accustomed to responding to emotional cues. When motivation is present, action feels easier, more fluid, more aligned. There is a sense of flow, a temporary harmony between desire and effort. But when motivation is absent, this harmony disappears. Action feels forced, heavy, resistant. It is in this moment that the illusion reveals itself. For if you only act when motivation is present, you surrender control of your life to a state that you cannot regulate. You become dependent on a condition that is inherently inconsistent. Your progress becomes sporadic, your efforts fragmented, your results unpredictable. You may have days of intense productivity where everything flows effortlessly, where you feel unstoppable. But these days are followed by periods of stagnation, where nothing moves, where even the simplest tasks feel insurmountable, and so you oscillate between extremes, never establishing a stable rhythm. This instability is not a failure of character, it is a failure of strategy. You have placed your trust in the wrong mechanism. To move beyond this, you must redefine your relationship with motivation. You must see it not as a prerequisite for action, but as a byproduct of it. When you begin a task without motivation, when you push through the initial resistance, when you engage with the work despite your reluctance, something begins to shift. The act of doing creates its own momentum. As you continue, the resistance often diminishes, replaced by a growing sense of engagement. This engagement is what you previously called motivation, but now you see that it emerged from action, not before it. This realization is transformative. It frees you from the need to wait. It allows you to act regardless of your emotional state. It gives you a sense of control, a recognition that you are not at the mercy of your feelings, but capable of directing your behavior independently of them. This does not mean that motivation is useless. It can be valuable, even powerful, when it appears. It can accelerate your efforts, enhance your focus, and make the process more enjoyable, but it must be understood as a supplement, not a foundation. It is something you can utilize when available, but not something you depend on. For if you depend on it, you will always be inconsistent. There is also a deeper psychological dimension to this illusion. Motivation is often tied to the anticipation of reward. You feel motivated when the outcome seems desirable, when the path appears clear, when success feels attainable. But when the outcome is uncertain, when the path is unclear, when failure is a possibility, motivation diminishes. In this way, motivation is biased toward comfort. It favors the familiar, the achievable, the safe. But growth rarely exists in these conditions. True development occurs in uncertainty, in difficulty, in the unknown. It requires you to move forward without guarantees, to invest effort without immediate reward, to persist despite the absence of positive feedback. These are precisely the conditions in which motivation is weakest. And so, if you rely on motivation, you will naturally avoid the very experiences that lead to growth. You will gravitate toward what feels good in the moment, rather than what is beneficial in the long term. You will remain within the boundaries of your comfort, rarely venturing beyond them. Discipline, on the other hand, operates independently of these biases. It allows you to act in alignment with your goals, even when the outcome is uncertain, even when the reward is distant, even when the process is uncomfortable. It enables you to bridge the gap between intention and execution. Regardless of how you feel, this is why discipline is often described as freedom. Not because it eliminates difficulty, but because it liberates you from the constraints of your emotional fluctuations. It allows you to maintain consistency, to build momentum, to create a stable foundation upon which progress can occur. Over time, this consistency reshapes your experience. You begin to trust yourself. You know that you will act, not because you feel like it, but because you have committed to it. This trust reduces internal conflict. You no longer spend energy debating whether or not to begin, whether or not to continue. The decision has already been made, and in this clarity there is a certain peace. You are no longer caught in the cycle of waiting and disappointment, of anticipation and inaction. You are moving, steadily, deliberately, regardless of your internal state. You are no longer chasing motivation. You are creating results. There is also an important paradox to consider. As you rely less on motivation, you often experience it more frequently. This is because consistent action creates progress, and progress generates positive feedback. You see results, you feel improvement, you gain confidence. These experiences naturally produce motivation, but now it is grounded in reality, in evidence, in actual movement. It is no longer a fleeting emotion disconnected from action. It is a response to it. This form of motivation is more stable, more reliable, because it is built upon something tangible. It reinforces your behavior rather than determining it. It becomes part of a cycle that supports growth, rather than a condition that must be met before growth can occur. Yet even here, discipline remains primary. For there will still be moments when motivation fades, when progress slows, when the initial excitement disappears. In these moments, the old illusion may attempt to return. You may feel the urge to wait, to pause, to delay until the feeling comes back. But now you know better. You understand that waiting is not the answer. You understand that action must continue, regardless of how you feel, and so you act, not with enthusiasm, perhaps, not with passion, but with commitment. You move forward, step by step, maintaining the pattern, reinforcing the structure. You do what is necessary, even when it is not pleasurable. This is the essence of discipline. It is not glamorous, it is not dramatic, it is quiet, consistent, and often invisible, but it is powerful, for it allows you to transcend the limitations of your emotional state. It enables you to create a life that is not dictated by fleeting feelings, but guided by deliberate choice. It gives you the ability to build, to grow, to evolve, regardless of the internal fluctuations that would otherwise hold you back. In the end, the illusion of motivation is not that it does not exist, but that it is misunderstood. It is not the starting point, it is not the foundation, it is the echo of action, the byproduct of engagement, the result of movement, and when you see it this way, you no longer wait for it. You begin without it, you continue without it, and in doing so you discover that you never truly needed it in the first place. Meaning does not emerge from chaos by accident. It is not something that simply appears when one drifts long enough through the currents of life, hoping that clarity will one day reveal itself. Meaning is constructed. It is shaped, refined, and stabilized through the deliberate act of bringing order to what would otherwise remain scattered, fragmented, and incoherent. Without order, experience dissolves into noise. With order, it becomes narrative. The human psyche, in its raw state, is not inherently organized. It is a vast and Melk's field of impulses, emotions, memories, instincts, and desires, many of which operate outside conscious awareness. Left unchecked, this inner landscape does not arrange itself into something meaningful. Instead, it tends toward entropy, a gradual descent into confusion, contradiction, and internal conflict. This is why order is not merely a preference, it is a necessity. To create order is to impose structure upon both the internal and external worlds. It is to take what is diffuse and give it form, to take what is chaotic and make it coherent. This process is not purely intellectual, it is deeply psychological. It affects how you perceive reality, how you interpret your experiences, and how you understand your place within the world. Without order, there is no stable framework through which meaning can arise. Consider a life without structure. Days blend into one another without distinction. Actions are guided by impulse rather than intention. Time is spent reactively, responding to whatever demands attention in the moment. There is no clear direction, no consistent pattern, no sense of progression. In such a state, even significant experiences lose their impact because they are not integrated into a larger context. They simply happen, and then they pass. This is not meaning, it is existence without coherence. Meaning requires connection. It requires that individual experiences be linked together in a way that forms a pattern, a story, a trajectory, and this linking process depends on order. Without a structured framework, experiences remain isolated, disconnected from one another, incapable of contributing to a larger understanding. Order provides that framework. It creates boundaries, priorities, and sequences. It determines what comes first, what follows, what matters, and what does not. It allows you to organize your actions in alignment with your V. Allows to allocate your time in accordance with your goals, to direct your energy toward what is significant rather than what is merely immediate. In this sense, order is not restrictive, it is generative. It produces clarity. When your life is ordered, you know what you are doing and why you are doing it. Your actions are not random, they are intentional. They fit into a larger structure, a system that reflects your understanding of what is meaningful. This clarity reduces internal conflict. You are no longer pulled in multiple directions by competing impulses because you have established a hierarchy. This hierarchy is essential. Not all things are equal. Not all desires deserve to be acted upon. Not all opportunities are worth pursuing. Without a hierarchy, you are overwhelmed by choice, paralyzed by possibility, unable to commit to any single path. But with a hierarchy, you can prioritize, you can focus, you can move forward with purpose. This is where discipline and order intersect. Discipline is the mechanism through which order is maintained. It is the force that ensures your actions remain aligned with your chosen structure, even when it is inconvenient, even when it is uncomfortable. Without discipline, order collapses. It dissolves under the pressure of impulse, distraction, and fatigue. And when order collapses, meaning begins to erode. This erosion is often subtle. It does not happen all at once, but gradually. A missed commitment here, a deviation there, a small compromise that seems insignificant in the moment. But over time, these deviations accumulate. The structure weakens, the clarity fades, the sense of direction becomes blurred. You may still be active, still engaged in various tasks, but something is missing. There is no coherence. You are moving but not progressing. This is the consequence of disorder. It is not merely inefficiency. It is a loss of meaning. For meaning is not found in isolated actions, but in the pattern they form over time. It is the result of sustained alignment between your behavior and your values, between your daily actions and your long-term vision. When this alignment is present, life feels purposeful. When it is absent, life feels fragmented. To restore meaning, you must restore order. This begins with awareness. You must examine your current patterns, your routines, your habits. You must ask whether they are aligned with what you consider meaningful or whether they are driven by convenience, by habit, by external pressures. This examination requires honesty because it may reveal inconsistencies that are uncomfortable to confront. But without this awareness, change is impossible. Once you see where disorder exists, you can begin to address it. This does not require a complete overhaul of your life. In fact, attempting to impose too much structure too quickly often leads to resistance and failure. Order is best established gradually, through small, consistent adjustments that build over time. You begin by creating structure in simple areas, your daily routine, for example, the way you start your day, the way you allocate your time, the way you approach your work. These may seem like minor details, but they have a profound impact on your overall sense of order. They create a rhythm, a predictable pattern that reduces uncertainty and increases stability. This stability is important. It provides a foundation upon which more complex forms of order can be built. It reduces cognitive load, allowing you to focus your energy on higher-level decisions rather than constantly managing basic tasks. It creates a sense of control, a feeling that your life is not entirely at the mercy of external forces. As this structure becomes established, you can extend it further. You can define clear goals, establish priorities, create systems that support your objectives. You can organize your environment, your commitments, your relationships in a way that reflects your values. Each of these actions contributes to the overall order of your life, and as order increases, something begins to emerge. Meaning, not as a sudden revelation, but as a gradual realization. You begin to see how your actions connect, how your efforts accumulate, how your life is moving in a particular direction. You experience a sense of coherence, a feeling that what you are doing matters, that it contributes to something larger than the immediate moment. This sense of meaning is deeply satisfying. It provides motivation, not in the fleeting, emotional sense, but in a stable, enduring way. It gives you a reason to continue to persist, to endure difficulty. It anchors you, providing a sense of purpose that is not easily shaken by temporary setbacks. There is also a deeper psychological aspect to this process. Order within the external world reflects and reinforces order within the internal world. When your environment is structured, when your actions are consistent, when your life follows a coherent pattern, your mind begins to mirror that structure. Your thoughts become clearer, your emotions more stable, your decisions more deliberate. This internal order is essential for psychological well-being. Without it, the mind becomes cluttered, overwhelmed by competing thoughts and unresolved tensions. Decision-making becomes difficult, focus becomes fragmented, and anxiety often increases. But with order, the mind has a framework within which to operate. It knows where to direct its attention, how to process information, how to move forward. This is why seemingly small acts of order, organizing your space, maintaining a routine, following through on commitments, can have such a significant impact on your mental state. They are not just practical actions, they are psychological ones. They signal to your psyche that there is structure, that there is stability, that there is a system in place. And this signal reduces uncertainty, which in turn reduces stress. But it is important to recognize that order is not rigidity. It is not about controlling every aspect of your life, eliminating all spontaneity, or adhering to a strict set of rules without flexibility. Such an approach can become oppressive, stifling creativity, and leading to burnout. True order is dynamic. It allows for adaptation, for change, for the unexpected. It provides a framework, but not a prison. It guides your actions but does not dictate them entirely. It is structured but not inflexible. This balance is crucial. Too little order leads to chaos and meaninglessness. Too much order leads to rigidity and stagnation. The goal is to find a balance that supports growth, that provides stability without eliminating freedom. This balance is not static. It must be adjusted over time as your circumstances change, as your goals evolve, as your understanding deepens. What constitutes order for you today may not be the same as what you need in the future, and so, the process of creating and maintaining order is ongoing. It requires continuous attention. You must regularly evaluate your systems, your routines, your priorities. You must be willing to adjust them, to refine them, to let go of what no longer serves you and adopt what does. This is not a one-time task, but a lifelong practice, and within this practice, meaning continues to develop, it deepens, becomes more nuanced, more integrated. It is no longer dependent on external validation or temporary achievements, but rooted in the structure of your life itself. You find meaning not just in what you accomplish, but in how you live, in the coherence of your actions, in the alignment between your inner values and your outer behavior. In this way, order becomes more than a tool. It becomes a path toward clarity, toward purpose, toward a life that is not only active, but meaningful, a life in which your actions are not random, but connected, not reactive, but intentional, not fragmented, but unified. And it is through this unity that meaning emerges, not as something you create. There is within you a division so subtle that most never perceive it, and yet so powerful that it governs the entire course of a life. It is the distinction between the ego and the self, between the constructed identity you present to the world and the deeper, more expansive totality of your being. To live unconsciously is to allow the ego to dominate, to mistake the surface for the whole, the mask for the essence. But to live consciously, to move toward wholeness, requires something far more difficult. The ego must come into service of the self. The ego, by its nature, is necessary. It is not an enemy, nor is it something to be destroyed. Without it, you would have no sense of individuality, no capacity to navigate the external world, no stable center from which to perceive and act. The ego organizes your experience, creates continuity in your identity, and allows you to function within society. It is the structure through which consciousness expresses itself. And yet, the ego has a tendency to overreach. It forgets its role. What begins as a tool becomes a tyrant. The ego, designed to serve, begins to rule. It seeks control, validation, recognition. It constructs an image of who you are and then demands that reality conform to that image. It clings to belief, defends its position, and resists anything that threatens its sense of stability. In this state, the ego becomes disconnected from the self. It operates independently, driven by its own fears and desires, rather than aligned with the deeper wisdom of the psyche. It pursues external success without internal coherence, achievement without meaning, recognition without authenticity. It builds a life that may appear structured on the outside, but feels hollow within. This is the fundamental misalignment, for the self, the true center of the psyche, is not concerned with appearances. It does not seek validation or comparison. It is oriented toward wholeness, toward integration, toward the realization of your full potential as a human being. It encompasses both the conscious and the unconscious, the light and the shadow, the known and the unknown. To live in alignment with the self is to live authentically. But authenticity is not comfortable for the ego. It requires relinquishing control. It demands that the ego accept its proper role, not as the master, but as the servant. This is a difficult transition because the ego equates control with safety. It believes that by maintaining its image, by avoiding vulnerability, by clinging to certainty, it can protect you. But this protection comes at a cost. It limits growth, it prevents you from confronting the shadow, from exploring the unknown, from evolving beyond the boundaries you have unconsciously accepted. It keeps you within a narrow definition of yourself, one that may be socially acceptable but psychologically incomplete. To shift this dynamic, the ego must be reoriented. It must recognize that it is not the center, but a part of a larger whole. This recognition is not intellectual. It is experiential. It arises through confrontation with the limits of the ego, through experiences that challenge its assumptions, that expose its weaknesses, that reveal the inadequacy of its control. These experiences are often uncomfortable. Failure, for example, is one such confrontation. When the ego identifies with success, with competence, with superiority, failure becomes a threat. It challenges the image the ego has constructed. It creates dissonance between how you see yourself and what you experience. The ego's response is often defensive. It rationalizes, blames, denies. It seeks to preserve its image at all costs. But in doing so, it avoids the deeper lesson. It misses the opportunity to grow, to adapt, to expand its understanding. If, however, the ego can step back, if it can allow the experience to be processed without distortion, something different occurs. The failure becomes informative. It reveals limitations, highlights areas for development, and provides insight into aspects of the self that were previously unseen. In this moment, the ego is no longer defending, it is learning. It is serving the self by facilitating growth rather than resisting it. This is the transformation. The ego does not disappear. It evolves. It becomes more flexible, more adaptive, more aligned with the deeper processes of the psyche. It no longer seeks to control every outcome, but instead supports the unfolding of the self. It becomes a mediator between the inner world and the outer world, translating insight into action, understanding into behavior. This alignment is essential for discipline. When the ego serves itself, discipline becomes distorted. It is driven by comparison, by the need to prove, to achieve, to be seen as successful. It becomes rigid, harsh, and often unsustainable. The individual may push themselves relentlessly, but the effort is hollow, disconnected from any deeper sense of purpose. Eventually, this leads to exhaustion. For the ego can drive effort, but it cannot sustain meaning. But when the ego serves the self, discipline takes on a different quality. It becomes purposeful. Actions are no longer driven solely by external goals, but by internal alignment. There is a sense that what you are doing matters, not because it will impress others, but because it reflects your true direction. Discipline becomes less about forcing yourself and more about expressing your values consistently. This does not make it easy. There is still effort, still resistance, still moments of doubt. But the effort is grounded in something deeper, something more stable than the shifting demands of the ego. It is anchored in the self, in a sense of inner truth that provides direction even in uncertainty. To cultivate this alignment, you must develop awareness. You must learn to distinguish between the voice of the ego and the call of the self. This is not always straightforward, because the ego can mimic the language of the self. It can present its desires as necessities, its fears as wisdom, its preferences as truth. But there are differences. The ego is reactive. It is concerned with how you are perceived, with how you compare, with how you measure up. It is easily threatened, easily offended, easily inflated. Its emotions are often intense, immediate, and tied to external circumstances. The self, in contrast, is steady. It is not reactive, but responsive. It does not seek validation, but alignment. Its guidance is quieter, less urgent, but more consistent. It is not concerned with immediate gratification, but with long-term integration. Learning to recognize these differences is crucial. It allows you to pause, to reflect, to choose which voice you will follow. It creates a space between impulse and action, between reaction and response. And within that space, discipline can operate. For discipline, in its highest form, is not imposed, it is chosen. It is the conscious decision to act in alignment with the self, even when the ego resists. It is the willingness to prioritize long-term growth over short-term comfort, authenticity over approval, truth over convenience. This choice must be made repeatedly. It is not a single moment of realization, but an ongoing practice. Each day presents new opportunities for alignment and misalignment, for service and self-interest. And each choice, no matter how small, contributes to the overall direction of your life. There will be setbacks, moments when the ego regains control, when old patterns resurface, when you act out of fear, pride, or insecurity. These moments are inevitable. The goal is not perfection, but awareness. When you recognize that you have acted from the ego, you have already taken a step toward alignment. You can reflect, learn, and adjust. This process of reflection is essential. It allows the ego to become more conscious of its tendencies, more aware of its limitations. Over time, this awareness reduces its dominance. It becomes less reactive, less controlling, more open to guidance from the self. And as this shift occurs, something changes within you. There is less internal conflict. Decisions become clearer, actions more consistent, direction more stable. You are no longer pulled in multiple directions by competing desires, because there is a hierarchy, a clear sense of what matters most. This hierarchy is established by the self. It provides a framework within which the ego can operate effectively. The ego handles the practical aspects of life, planning, organizing, executing, while the self provides the overarching direction. Together, they create a system that is both functional and meaningful. This is the ideal relationship, not domination, but cooperation. The ego does not disappear, nor does it lose its importance. It becomes refined, integrated, aligned. It serves as the vehicle through which the self expresses itself in the world, and in this alignment, discipline reaches its highest form. It is no longer a struggle between opposing forces, but a unified movement toward a coherent goal. Actions flow from a place of inner clarity, supported by a structure that is both flexible and stable. You act not because you must, but because it is who you are. This is the essence of the statement, the ego must serve the self. It is not a rejection of the ego, but a redefinition of its role. It is the recognition that true power does not come from control, but from alignment. That true success is not measured by external achievement alone, but by internal coherence, and that the path to wholeness lies not in elevating one part of the psyche above all others, but in bringing them into harmony. This harmony is not given, it is cultivated through awareness, through discipline, through the willingness to confront yourself honestly and to adjust accordingly. It is a lifelong process, a continuous unfolding, a gradual movement toward integration. But within this process lies a profound transformation, for as the ego learns to serve the self, you begin to live not as a collection of competing impulses, but as a unified being, directed, purposeful, and whole. There is a tendency within the human psyche to seek transformation through grand gestures, to imagine that identity is reshaped in a single moment of revelation, a sudden breakthrough, a dramatic act of will. The ego, ever drawn to the spectacle, prefers the myth of instant change. It dreams of becoming something entirely new overnight, as though the past could be discarded in a single decisive act. But this is not how the psyche evolves. This is not how identity is formed. Transformation, in its truest sense, is quiet. It does not announce itself with intensity or demand recognition from the external world. It unfolds slowly, almost imperceptibly, through a series of small, repeated actions, what we might call small victories. These victories are often dismissed by the ego because they lack grandeur. They do not satisfy the desire for immediate validation. They are subtle, sometimes even mundane, and yet it is precisely within these small acts that the deepest restructuring of the psyche occurs. A single discipline choice, waking early when you would rather remain in comfort, completing a task when resistance arises, speaking truth when it would be easier to remain silent, may appear insignificant in isolation, but the psyche does not measure significance in the same way the ego does. It responds to repetition, to consistency, to patterns of behavior that signal what is valued and what is not. Each small victory is a message. It communicates to the deeper layers of the psyche. This is who I am becoming. At first, this message is fragile. It competes with older, more established patterns, habits of avoidance, self-doubt, procrastination, and fear. These patterns have been reinforced over time, and they possess a certain inertia. The psyche, accustomed to these familiar cycles, resists change not out of malice, but out of a desire for stability. Even dysfunctional patterns can feel safe, simply because they are known. This is why the initial stages of transformation are often the most difficult. When you attempt to act differently, to choose discipline over indulgence, courage over fear, you encounter resistance. This resistance is not merely physical or emotional. It is psychological. It is the echo of your past asserting itself, attempting to preserve the identity you have unconsciously constructed. In this moment, the importance of small victories becomes clear. For large, sweeping changes are often unsustainable at this stage. They require a level of internal alignment that has not yet been established. But small actions, manageable, repeatable, consistent, can bypass this resistance. They do not overwhelm the psyche. They gently introduce a new pattern. And with each repetition, this pattern strengthens. Consider the act of keeping a promise to yourself. It may be something simple, completing a short period of focused work, maintaining a daily routine, or following through on a commitment despite discomfort. Each time you honor that promise, you reinforce a new association within the psyche. I am someone who follows through. This association is not formed through thought alone. You cannot think your way into a new identity. The psyche requires evidence, it requires action, and each small victory provides that evidence, gradually shifting the internal narrative from one of inconsistency to one of reliability. Over time, these shifts accumulate. What was once effortful becomes natural. What required conscious discipline becomes habitual. The identity begins to stabilize around these new patterns, not because you have declared it, but because you have embodied it repeatedly. This is the true mechanism of transformation. It is not imposed from the outside, nor is it achieved through a single act of will. It emerges from within, shaped by the consistent alignment of action and intention. The ego, however, often resists this process. It becomes impatient. It seeks immediate results, visible progress, external validation. When these are not forthcoming, it may interpret the slow pace of change as failure. It may abandon the process altogether, returning to familiar patterns that offer quicker gratification. This is the danger, for in dismissing small victories, the ego undermines the very process that leads to lasting transformation. It overlooks the subtle but powerful shifts occurring beneath the surface, focusing instead on what has not yet changed. But the psyche does not operate on the ego's timeline. It requires patience, it requires trust in the process, even when the results are not immediately visible. It requires the willingness to continue, to repeat, to reinforce, even in the absence of external reward. This is where discipline becomes essential, not as a force of harsh control, but as a steady commitment to consistent action. Discipline ensures that small victories are not isolated events, but part of a larger pattern. It creates continuity, allowing each action to build upon the last. Without discipline, small victories remain scattered. With discipline, they become a structure. And within this structure, identity begins to take shape. There is also an important psychological shift that occurs as these victories accumulate. Initially, action is driven by effort. You do something because you should, because you have decided it is necessary. But over time, as the pattern becomes ingrained, the motivation changes. You begin to act, not because you should, but because it aligns with who you are. This is a profound transition. It marks the movement from external motivation to internal identity. The behavior is no longer something you force upon yourself. It becomes an expression of your self-concept. At this stage, resistance diminishes. Not entirely, but significantly. The actions that once felt unnatural now feel consistent with your identity. To not perform them would create dissonance. The psyche, having adapted to the new pattern, now supports it. This is the power of small victories. They do not merely change what you do, they change who you are, and this change is stable. It is not dependent on temporary states of motivation or emotion. It is rooted in the structure of the psyche itself, in the patterns that have been established through repetition. However, it is important to recognize that this process is ongoing. Identity is not fixed. It continues to evolve, shaped by new experiences, new actions, new patterns. Small victories remain relevant at every stage, not just at the beginning. They are the mechanism through which refinement occurs, through which growth continues. Even those who have achieved a high level of discipline rely on these small acts. They understand that consistency must be maintained, that identity must be reinforced. They do not assume that transformation once achieved is permanent. They continue to engage in the practices that sustain it. This humility is essential, for the psyche, left unattended, will revert to familiar patterns. Old habits do not disappear entirely. They remain dormant, ready to reemerge under certain conditions. Small victories serve as a counterbalance, continually reinforcing the desired direction. There is also a deeper, more subtle aspect to this process. Each small victory contributes not only to behavioral change, but to psychological integration. When you act in alignment with your values, you reduce internal conflict. The different parts of the psyche, desire, intention, action, begin to align. This alignment creates a sense of coherence. You feel more stable, more grounded, more certain of your direction. Decisions become easier because they are guided by an established pattern. You are no longer negotiating with yourself at every step. The path is clearer. This clarity is often mistaken for confidence, but it is something deeper. It is the result of internal consistency, of a psyche that is no longer fragmented by conflicting impulses, and it is built step by step through the accumulation of small victories. It is also worth noting that small victories are not always visible to others. They occur in private moments, in choices that no one else sees. The decision to persist, to resist distraction, to act with integrity, these are often unnoticed by the external world, but they are not unnoticed by you. The psyche records them. It integrates them into your sense of self, shaping how you perceive your own capabilities and character. This internal recognition is far more important than external validation, for it is the foundation of true self-confidence. Confidence, in this sense, is not a belief imposed upon yourself. It is a conclusion drawn from evidence, and small victories provide that evidence. They demonstrate repeatedly that you are capable of acting in alignment with your intentions. They build trust within yourself, a trust that is far more resilient than any external affirmation. Over time, this trust becomes a defining aspect of your identity. You begin to rely on yourself. You know that when you decide to act, you will follow through. This reliability reduces anxiety, increases stability, and enhances your ability to navigate challenges. For when difficulties arise, and they inevitably will, You do not rely solely on hope or motivation. You rely on your established patterns. You continue to act, to persist, to apply discipline, because it is what you have trained yourself to do. Small victories, accumulated over time, provide the foundation for this resilience. They prepare you, not for a single moment of transformation, but for a lifetime of growth. And this is perhaps the most important realization. Transformation is not an event, it is a process, a continuous unfolding, shaped by the choices you make each day. Small victories are the building blocks of this process, the means by which the abstract idea of change becomes a concrete reality. They may seem insignificant in isolation, but together they form a pattern, and that pattern becomes your identity. So do not underestimate them. Do not dismiss the small, the subtle, the seemingly trivial. For within these moments lies the power to reshape your life, not through sudden upheaval, but through steady, deliberate evolution. Each small victory is a step, each step is a signal, and each signal, repeated over time, transforms not only what you do, but who you are becoming. Resistance is one of the most misunderstood phenomena in the human experience. The uninitiated, the unconsciously living, interpret resistance as failure, as a sign of inadequacy, as a barrier meant to halt progress. The ego recoils at it, seeing it as an affront, a threat, an unwelcome interruption in the pursuit of comfort, ease, or success. And yet, from the perspective of the psyche, from the lens of depth psychology, resistance is not an obstacle to be avoided, but a signal to be acknowledged, a marker of the frontier of your own growth, a message from the deeper self that you are on the verge of transformation. Growth by its very nature is uncomfortable. It challenges the familiar. It demands that the mind, the heart, and the body stretch beyond their accustomed patterns. It confronts long-held beliefs, habitual behaviors, and unconscious defenses. It exposes the areas of the psyche that have remained dormant or repressed, and in doing so it triggers discomfort, struggle, and resistance. Resistance arises precisely because something within you is being provoked into life, awakened from inertia, and called into alignment with your evolving potential. Resistance manifests in many forms. It may appear as procrastination, as hesitation, as distraction. It may emerge as anxiety, doubt, or fear. It may even take the form of physical tension, a psychosomatic signal that your inner world is grappling with forces that demand acknowledgement. Each manifestation is meaningful. Each is a message that you have there encountered a threshold, a boundary, or a domain of the self that has been neglected or unintegrated. Where resistance exists, there is an invitation to look more deeply, to act more consciously, to engage more fully with the process of becoming. The first step in understanding resistance is to recognize its inevitability. No growth occurs without it. No transformation proceeds without friction. In the evolutionary process of the psyche, resistance is a necessary companion, a feedback mechanism, a guidepost. The very fact that resistance appears indicates that the psyche is being activated, that the unconscious is responding, and that latent potential is seeking expression. To interpret resistance as merely a hindrance is to misunderstand the architecture of psychological development. Resistance is also highly individual. What provokes struggle in one person may leave another unaffected. What triggers fear in one psyche may evoke curiosity in another. This is because resistance is calibrated to the thresholds of the individual self. It is personal, adaptive, and precise. It is tailored to your current level of readiness, to the particular aspects of your shadow, to the unconscious patterns that have been operating beneath the surface of awareness. When resistance emerges, it is doing so in relation to your unique structure of being, marking the precise locations where integration is required, where transformation is possible, and where growth is imminent. To engage with resistance requires courage, patience, and discernment. It requires the willingness to stop perceiving struggle as failure and begin perceiving it as guidance. Resistance is not random, it is intelligent. It is the psyche's way of saying, "Here lies something you have not fully mastered, something you have avoided, something you must integrate to move forward. It signals the boundaries of your current self and illuminates the direction in which your development is required. Ignoring resistance does not make it disappear. It only prolongs the struggle, pushing growth to be realized in harsher, less conscious ways. Confronting resistance is an act of consciousness. It demands self-reflection and introspection. When the mind recoils, when the body tightens, when fear or doubt emerges, you are being called to observe, to see what is happening without judgment, to discern the forces at play within yourself. What beliefs are being challenged? What habits are being disrupted? What truths are being exposed that you have long ignored? Resistance is the gateway to self-knowledge, and self-knowledge is the foundation of meaningful growth. Importantly, resistance is not uniform. It has stages. Early resistance may appear subtle, almost imperceptible. A minor hesitation, a fleeting doubt, a small distraction. If ignored, it intensifies. Mid-stage resistance might take the form of conflict, frustration, and emotional agitation. Late-stage resistance can manifest as overt crises. Fear, panic, a sense of being overwhelmed, even physical symptoms. Each stage is a reflection of the depth of the transformation being attempted and the degree of integration required. Recognizing these stages allows one to navigate resistance with wisdom rather than panic, to engage with it methodically, and to understand that each encounter is a milestone on the path of personal evolution. The ego often misinterprets resistance as antagonistic. It sees resistance as a personal attack, a negation of its plans, a disruption of its desire for immediate satisfaction. The ego responds by attempting to suppress, circumvent, or escape the resistance. It seeks to maintain comfort, to preserve identity, to avoid discomfort. Yet, such reactions are counterproductive. They reinforce the very limitations. Resistance is seeking to illuminate. They maintain stagnation, protect the status quo, and prevent the unfolding of latent potential. To act against resistance impulsively is to act against growth itself. The disciplined approach to resistance involves acknowledgement and engagement. It involves sitting with the discomfort, examining it, understanding it, and allowing it to inform your actions. It is a practice of conscious confrontation, not reacting automatically, but responding with awareness. This approach transforms resistance from an adversary into a teacher, from a blockade into a pathway, from a source of frustration into a catalyst for development. The act of facing resistance, moment by moment, gradually expands the capacity of the psyche to tolerate, integrate, and transcend the challenges that once felt insurmountable. Resistance also reveals the hidden contours of the self. Where you experience the greatest struggle, there lies a portion of the psyche that has remained unexamined, unintegrated, or undeveloped. These are often elements of the shadow, the aspects of personality, desire, or fear that you have repressed, denied, or disowned. Resistance exposes these elements, forcing you to confront them. This confrontation is not punitive, it is liberatory. By engaging with resistance, you bring these hidden parts into consciousness, you integrate them into the self, and you expand your capacity for wholeness. Resistance is thus intimately connected to shadow work. It is the shadow's way of saying, you are ready to evolve. Moreover, resistance is intimately tied to the development of resilience. By repeatedly encountering and working through resistance, the psyche builds strength, the ability to face discomfort, uncertainty, and challenge without fleeing or collapsing is cultivated. Each encounter with resistance adds to the reservoir of endurance, courage, and adaptability. Over time, what once provoked fear or hesitation becomes manageable. The thresholds of growth expand, and the individual develops a broader capacity for engagement with life's complexities. Resistance is also a measure of significance. The more profound the internal shift required, the greater the resistance will be. Minor changes, superficial adjustments, and low-stakes transformations encounter little resistance because they demand little from the psyche. But deep, meaningful changes that touch the core of values, identity, or purpose, inevitably provoke strong resistance. Therefore, when resistance is intense, it is not a signal of inadequacy. It is an indication of depth, an affirmation that you are approaching the frontiers of your potential. The magnitude of resistance is proportional to the magnitude of growth. In this sense, resistance is a compass. It indicates the direction in which the self is calling for expansion. It identifies areas where integration, mastery, and transformation are needed. It illuminates the path that lies beyond comfort and familiarity into the realm where the psyche becomes more whole, more conscious, and more capable of authentic expression. To ignore this compass is to drift aimlessly. To follow it, however, cautiously, is to move intentionally towards self-realization. Resistance also requires reflection, not mere endurance. The goal is not to persist blindly in the face of difficulty, but to learn from the experience. Each act of confrontation provides insight into personal limits, habitual responses, unconscious patterns, and emerging strengths. Reflection allows the psyche to assimilate the lessons embedded in resistance, transforming struggle into wisdom. The process is iterative: encounter, reflection, integration, followed by further encounters, each deeper and more refined than the last. Furthermore, resistance cultivates humility. It reminds the individual that mastery is never complete, that growth is an ongoing process, that the self is complex and multifaceted. It prevents complacency, disrupting the ego's illusions of certainty and control. Through resistance, the psyche is repeatedly confronted with its own limitations, not to shame it, but to teach it. Humility, cultivated in this way, becomes a necessary companion to wisdom and authentic power. There is also a creative dimension to resistance. Just as friction generates heat, as challenge generates adaptation, as tension produces energy, resistance stimulates ingenuity, flexibility, and problem-solving. It forces the individual to seek new approaches, to think differently, and to act with increased awareness. Without resistance, the psyche might remain passive, repetitive, or unexamined. Resistance compels active engagement with life, a dynamic interplay between challenge and response that fosters creativity and innovation in thought, behavior, and character. Resistance, then, is the hidden currency of growth. It is the measure of the work required, the signal of transformation in progress, the vehicle through which the psyche expands. It is not punishment, nor is it obstacle. It is feedback, guide, and catalyst all at once. Those who embrace resistance, who interpret it correctly, who engage with it consciously, find that it serves as an accelerant for development, a marker of meaningful challenge, and a source of insight into the deepest structures of the self. Ultimately, resistance is inseparable from the process of individuation. The journey toward wholeness is never linear. It is marked by setbacks, struggles, and tensions that test the boundaries of identity, morality, creativity, and courage. Resistance signals that these boundaries are being stretched, that integration is required, and that the self is being called to a higher level of coherence and authenticity. Those who understand and embrace this truth move through resistance with purpose, clarity, and resilience, recognizing that the very struggle they fear is the very force propelling them toward growth, wholeness, and the realization of their latent potential. The psyche communicates most profoundly through these moments. Resistance is not the enemy. It is the herald of emergence, the gatekeeper of transformation, and the signpost pointing toward the expansive horizon of a self that is conscious, resilient, and fully alive. Those who learn to welcome resistance, to interpret it, to act through it, and to integrate its lessons, discover that what was once feared as a barrier is, in truth, the clearest indicator that growth is occurring, that transformation is underway, and that the self is evolving into a richer, deeper, more capable expression of its own inherent potential. Discipline is often misunderstood as a rigid imposition of rules, a harsh self-denial, or an externalized attempt to control behavior. In the shallow understanding of the ego, discipline is a tool of willpower, a mechanism to achieve immediate goals, to conform to social expectations, or to enforce a particular image. Yet from the perspective of the psyche, from the vantage point of true inner development and the work of individuation, discipline is far more profound, subtle, and transformative. It is not merely about compliance or effort. It is the pathway through which the fragmented self begins to integrate, through which the scattered energies of the psyche converge, and through which the individual begins to approach wholeness. To understand discipline as a vehicle toward wholeness, one must first recognize the fragmented nature of the human psyche. Each person carries within them multiple layers, sometimes harmonious, often conflicting, ranging from conscious intentions to unconscious desires, from the light aspects of personality to the shadowed, neglected dimensions. The ego by itself is ill-equipped to navigate this complexity. It tends to identify with certain aspects of the self while denying or repressing others, creating imbalance. Without conscious effort, without intentional engagement, the psyche remains fractured. Desire opposes reason, impulses oppression, fear opposes courage. Wholeness cannot arise in the midst of such dissonance. It demands alignment, cohesion, and the harmonization of these disparate parts. Discipline, when properly understood and applied, is the mechanism by which this alignment is fostered. Discipline is first an act of consciousness. It requires awareness of one's impulses, tendencies, habits, and resistances. It is the decision to observe oneself, to recognize where chaos resides within, and to take deliberate steps toward integration. This awareness is crucial because discipline without insight becomes mere mechanical repetition or enforced adherence. True discipline is guided by understanding. It is an intelligent ordering of action in accordance with the deeper structure of the psyche. Through repeated conscious acts, the mind and body begin to internalize patterns of integrity and coherence, allowing the individual to act in harmony with their higher self rather than in servitude to fleeting desires or external pressures. The practice of discipline manifests in multiple forms: the regulation of attention, the cultivation of habits, the management of emotional responses, and the consistent pursuit of meaningful objectives. Each of these domains, approached with mindful intention, contributes to the gradual unification of the psyche. Consider attention, for example. The human mind is naturally distracted, pulled by external stimuli and internal chatter alike. Discipline of attention is the act of choosing focus, of resisting superficial diversions, and of returning repeatedly to what is essential. In doing so, the psyche develops coherence. It learns to direct its energy rather than scatter it. Over time, this focused direction becomes a cornerstone of self-mastery and a key aspect of wholeness. Habits, similarly, are the building blocks of the self. Left unmanaged, they may perpetuate disintegration, indulgence, avoidance, procrastination, or unconscious reaction, but with disciplined cultivation, habits become conduits of integration. Small, consistent practices, whether in thought, action, or emotion, aggregate over time, forming the scaffolding upon which a more complete self can emerge. The discipline to engage in meaningful repetition is a recognition that transformation is not instantaneous, that wholeness is constructed gradually through sustained effort, reflection, and realignment. Emotional discipline is equally essential. The psyche is fraught with tension, fear, desire, anger, shame, and longing. These forces, if left unchecked, fragment the self, provoking inner conflict and external dysfunction. To discipline emotions is not to suppress or deny them. It is to engage with them consciously, to understand their sources, to channel their energy constructively, and to integrate their messages into conscious awareness. This process cultivates emotional maturity and fosters the emergence of a psyche that is balanced, coherent, and capable of respond into life rather than being dominated by reactive patterns. Discipline also requires the cultivation of patience. Wholeness is not achieved overnight. It is the cumulative result of countless conscious choices, repeated actions, and incremental growth. The ego, craving immediacy and validation, often resists this slow unfolding. It may seek shortcuts, demand results, or become frustrated by the perceived lack of progress. Discipline teaches the ego restraint. It trains the individual to persist in the face of resistance, discomfort, and uncertainty, to value the long-term coherence of the self over transient gratifications or external applause. In doing so, discipline becomes a bridge between the immediate and the enduring, between action and integration. An essential dimension of discipline is its relationship to the shadow. The shadow comprises the repressed, denied, or unacknowledged aspects of the self-desires, fears, instincts, and impulses that have not been assimilated into conscious awareness. These elements, if ignored, continue to exert influence, often in destructive or compulsive ways. Discipline enables engagement with the shadow. Through disciplined observation, reflection, and ethical action, the individual learns to confront, understand, and integrate these hidden aspects, transforming potential chaos into conscious energy. Each encounter with the shadow, mediated by discipline, contributes to the expansion of wholeness, for wholeness requires the acknowledgement and incorporation of all facets of the self, not merely the cultivated or socially acceptable ones. Discipline also intersects with the body. The mind and body are inseparable. Psychic integration is mirrored in physical regulation. Regularity in sleep, exercise, diet, and bodily awareness are not mere utilities. They are acts of discipline that reinforce the unity of mind and body. Neglect of the body produces fragmentation, tension, and vulnerability. Attentiveness to bodily practices strengthens the foundation upon which psychological integration can be built. Discipline in bodily life is thus both practical and symbolic. It trains the self to respect boundaries, to cultivate resilience, and to align physical existence with psychic purpose. When the individual engages in regular structured practices, when attention, habit, emotion, shadow work, and bodily regulation are aligned, a clear field emerges in which the psyche can operate without distortion. Choices become more transparent, priorities more coherent, and actions more consistent with the deeper goals of the self. Wholeness is characterized by this clarity, the integration of desire, reason, and instinct, the alignment of internal and external action, the coherence of thought, feeling, and behavior. Discipline, through repeated engagement with structured practices, nurtures this clarity, gradually transforming fragmented tendencies into coordinated expression. Discipline also cultivates resilience. Life is replete with challenges, setbacks, and disillusionments. The untrained psyche, fragmented and reactive, is buffeted by these forces, easily destabilized, prone to despair or avoidance. A disciplined psyche, however, is grounded. It has practiced self-regulation, consistency, and conscious engagement. It has learned to confront resistance, to integrate the shadow, to persist in the face of discomfort. As a result, it responds with flexibility, composure, and adaptive intelligence. Resilience is not merely survival, it is the capacity to sustain coherence, to maintain alignment with the self, and to act purposefully amid uncertainty. Discipline is the mechanism through which this resilience is developed. A further dimension is ethical and moral alignment. True discipline is not devoid of conscience. It is suffused with the ethical dimension of the self. Actions that are disciplined but misaligned with deeper values create internal conflict and fragmentation. Discipline directed by ethical reflection, however, reinforces integrity, coherence, and authenticity. Wholeness is inseparable from alignment with the higher aspects of the psyche, the archetypal values that guide development, and the emergent sense of purpose that orients the individual toward meaningful engagement with the world. Through disciplined attention to moral and ethical coherence, the individual cultivates a life that is internally consistent and outwardly effective. Discipline also sharpens discernment. In a fragmented psyche, impulses, emotions, and desires often collide chaotically, producing confusion, indecision, and erratic action. Through disciplined engagement, the mind learns to evaluate, weigh, and prioritize, distinguishing between transient impulses and enduring values, between reactive desires and considered intentions. Discernment is the ability to navigate complexity without being overwhelmed, to act in alignment with the integrated self rather than under the sway of fragmented components. It is cultivated gradually through disciplined reflection, conscious choice, and repeated experience. Furthermore, discipline fosters self-trust. The individual who practices consistent, conscious engagement learns that action can be guided by insight, reflection, and awareness rather than solely by external validation or compulsive desire. This trust in oneself, built through the habitual alignment of intention and action, reinforces the coherence of identity. Wholeness is impossible without this self-trust, for it enables the individual to navigate uncertainty, confront fear, and act with authenticity. Discipline, by providing repeated evidence of the reliability of self-guided action, underpins the development of this trust. Finally, discipline transforms time itself. In a fragmented or undisciplined life, time is often experienced as chaotic, rushed, or wasted, punctuated by distraction and scattered attention. Through disciplined structuring of action, reflection, and engagement, the individual learns to inhabit time meaningfully, to align daily practice with long-term purpose, and to orchestrate life so that each moment contributes to the emergence of wholeness. Time ceases to be merely a sequence of events and becomes a medium of transformation, a canvas upon which the integrated self can be expressed. Thus, discipline is not an external imposition, nor is it merely a tool for achievement. It is the scaffolding through which the psyche is integrated, the mechanism through which fragmented tendencies coalesce, the practice through which the individual moves toward the full realization of the self. Each act of disciplined attention, each repeated engagement with habit, shadow, emotion, and body contributes to the gradual unification of the psyche. Through this persistent conscious cultivation, the individual experiences coherence, clarity, resilience, and alignment, the hallmarks of wholeness. Wholeness is not perfection. It is not a static endpoint. It is a dynamic state of integrated being, in which the various dimensions of the psyche, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, instinct and reflection, are harmonized and coordinated. Discipline is the bridge that connects the fragmented present with this emergent potential, transforming scattered energies into cohesive expression, chaotic impulses into guided action, and unconscious tendencies into conscious mastery. Through discipline, the individual cultivates the capacity to act with purpose, to engage life with integrity, and to embody a coherent, resilient, and fully actualized self. Through discipline, the fragmented self is guided toward integration. Through sustained, conscious effort, wholeness becomes not merely a distant ideal, but a lived, embodied reality. And so, my friends, understand this deeply. Self-discipline is not a burden. It is a liberation. It is the key that unlocks the prison of unconscious living. It is the force that transforms potential into reality, chaos into clarity, and fragmentation into unity. The question is not whether you are capable of discipline. The question is whether you are willing to face yourself, to confront your shadow, to endure discomfort, and to rise beyond the limitations you have unconsciously accepted. For in the end, the disciplined man does not merely achieve success, he becomes something far greater. He becomes whole. Final World is an expansive meditation on the culmination of the human journey. The meeting point of consciousness, discipline, shadow, and wholeness is not a destination in the ordinary sense. It is not a point on a map, nor a marker of achievement in the narrow sense of the ego's metrics. Rather, it is the psychological, spiritual, and existential horizon toward which the entirety of conscious striving, disciplined effort, and integration of the self tends. It is the intersection where all the layers of the psyche, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, instinct and intellect, emotion and reason, converge into a coherent and dynamic whole. To speak of the final world is to speak of the deepest reality of the human interior, a realm where the illusions of separateness dissolve, where the fragmented tendencies of the mind find unity, and where the self begins to resonate with its fullest potential. The journey toward Wholeness begins with awareness, the awakening of the psyche to its own complexity. Each human being is born into a world of imposed structures, inherited patterns, social conditioning, and instinctive drives. From the earliest moments of consciousness, the ego begins to organize experience, to prioritize survival, pleasure, and approval, often at the expense of deeper truths. Patterns of repetition form, habits entrench themselves, and the individual becomes familiar with the familiar. This is the foundation of the ordinary self, the everyday ego, which is functional but limited. The final worldies are reached not by escaping this ego, but by transforming it, by aligning its energies with the greater currents of the psyche. This transformation begins with attention, the conscious acknowledgement of one's internal processes, the recognition of habitual reactions, and the willingness to explore the depths of the unconscious. Central to this exploration is the confrontation with the shadow, the unacknowledged, repressed, and denied aspects of the self. The shadow is not evil in itself. It is simply undeveloped, unconscious energy. It contains instincts, desires, fears, and truths that the ego has rejected, forgotten, or resisted. The final worldies are inseparable from shadow work because integration requires the recognition of these hidden forces. Each act of facing the shadow, whether through reflection, emotional engagement, or disciplined action, is a step toward coherence. To deny the shadow is to remain in partiality, to live in fragmented worlds where light and darkness are at war. To embrace it is to begin constructing the internal architecture of wholeness. Discipline is the engine of this integration. It is through disciplined attention, repetition, and conscious action that the energies of the psyche are aligned. Small victories, as previously discussed, accumulate into patterns that solidify identity, develop resilience, and build trust within oneself. Discipline is not coercion or self-flagellation. It is the methodical cultivation of internal order. In the final worldies, discipline ensures that insight is translated into action, that understanding does not remain theoretical, and that integration of the shadow is manifested in lived behavior. Without discipline, the unfolding of wholeness remains incomplete, fragmented, or illusory. Pain is a companion on this path, not an enemy. The final worldies are never reached through comfort alone. Suffering, loss, and challenge serve as catalysts for reflection, insight, and reorganization. Pain exposes the fractures in the psyche, illuminating what has been neglected or denied. It demands engagement, adaptation, and transformation. The disciplined individual learns not to flee from pain, but to use it as a teacher. Each encounter with difficulty deepens awareness, fosters resilience, and strengthens the capacity to act in accordance with higher principles. Pain is the crucible in which the fragmented self is refined, tempered, and prepared for greater integration. Repetition shapes the psyche in subtle and profound ways. Through repeated action, thought, and reflection, the internal landscape is reorganized. Patterns are reinforced, habits are formed, and the structure of identity is gradually reconstructed. In the final worldies, repetition is not mindless routine, it is the deliberate cultivation of coherence. Each act, no matter how small, contributes to the architecture of the self. Over time, what was once effortful becomes natural, and the alignment of conscious intention with action becomes habitual. In this habitual alignment lies stability, clarity, and the capacity to navigate the complexities of life with composure and insight. Resistance is another essential component of the journey. It appears whenever the psyche encounters its own boundaries, when growth demands engagement. If the unknown or the disowned, resistance manifests as doubt, fear, procrastination, or emotional turmoil. The ego interprets it as failure, but the psyche signals it as a marker of imminent expansion. In the final worldies, resistance is embraced as an indicator of meaningful engagement. To confront resistance is to activate latent potential, to integrate hidden aspects of the self, and to extend the boundaries of identity. Resistance is not an adversary but a herald, signaling the presence of the frontier where growth occurs. Motivation alone is insufficient for this journey. Motivation is often fleeting, superficial, and dependent on external stimuli or internal fluctuations of emotion. The final worlds are accessed not by intermittent enthusiasm, but through sustained discipline, deliberate practice, and conscious engagement. The illusion of motivation is dismantled as one realizes that true transformation emerges from consistency, not from episodic inspiration. Discipline bridges the gap between intention and realization, ensuring that the work of integration continues regardless of temporary inclinations or distractions. Order creates meaning in this process. Without structure, the energy of the psyche remains chaotic, scattered, and uncoordinated. By establishing patterns, routines, and frameworks for engagement, the individual imposes a form upon the fluidity of experience, allowing the mind and spirit to coalesce into functional coherence. The final worlds are characterized by this emergent order, a harmony between conscious choice and unconscious integration, between freedom and responsibility, between chaos and structure. Within this order, the individual discovers purpose, alignment, and the capacity to navigate existence with clarity and intentionality. Ego must serve the self. The ego, left unchecked, seeks self-preservation, gratification, and validation. It can dominate the psyche, creating illusions of power and coherence that are ultimately fragile. In the final worlds, the ego is no longer the master but the instrument. It functions as a tool for conscious engagement, disciplined action, and shadow integration. Its energy is directed toward the realization of the self rather than the pursuit of transient satisfactions. Through this alignment, egoic impulses are harnessed rather than suppressed, resulting in a psyche that is both coherent and dynamic, capable of action while remaining anchored in wholeness. Small victories repeated and reinforced transform identity. Each choice to act with integrity, courage, and awareness reshapes the internal narrative of the self. In the final worlds, these accumulated acts create a stable and resilient identity, one capable of sustaining integration even amidst chaos, challenge, and uncertainty. The psyche becomes self-reinforcing, a system in which conscious choice, disciplined action, and integrated awareness continually strengthen one another. Wholeness emerges as the natural culmination of these processes. It is not a static state, but a dynamic equilibrium in which light and shadow are reconciled, desire and reason are harmonized, and instinct and intellect coalesce. Wholeness is the integration of the fragmented self into a coherent, resilient, and adaptive organism of consciousness. Discipline, shadow work, engagement with resistance, reflection on pain, repeated alignment of action with intention, and ethical coherence all converge to cultivate this state. In the final worlds, the individual experiences a profound sense of presence, clarity, and agency. The mind is focused yet flexible, the heart is open yet discerning, the body is responsive yet grounded. Consciousness is no longer scattered, reactive, or dominated by unacknowledged impulses. Instead, it is with coherence, resilience, and intentionality. Actions are guided by awareness, choices are informed by reflection, and experiences are integrated rather than fragmented. Here, the interplay of freedom and responsibility becomes evident. The fully integrated self is free not because it acts without constraint, but because it acts from alignment, coherence, and understanding. Freedom is realized through disciplined choice, through the harmonization of inner forces, and through the cultivation of clarity. Responsibility is inherent, for every action reflects the integrated self and contributes to the ongoing evolution of identity. The final worlds are thus not merely a psychological achievement, but an ethical one, in which the individual navigates existence with awareness, integrity, and purpose. Time in these worlds is perceived differently. It is not a linear sequence of fragmented moments, but a medium through which the ongoing process of integration unfolds. Each moment is an opportunity for alignment, reflection, and action. Repetition is both the rhythm and the substance of growth. Discipline transforms the experience of time into a tool for wholeness, allowing the individual to inhabit life intentionally, to act with foresight, and to integrate experience into the evolving structure of the psyche. Ultimately, the finite worldias are not an endpoint, but a continuous unfolding. They represent the ongoing interplay between the conscious and unconscious, the known and the unknown, the structured and the emergent. Wholeness is never complete. It is dynamic, responsive, and evolving. Each act of reflection, each encounter with resistance, each disciplined repetition contributes to its refinement. Each engagement with the shadow, each integration of pain, each alignment of action with intention reinforces the coherence of the self. To inhabit the finite worldias is to live with awareness, integrity, and purpose. It is to recognize that the journey is not a race, but a deliberate cultivation of the self. It is to understand that the challenges, resistances, and pains encountered along the way are not impediments, but guides, markers of thresholds crossed, and indicators of growth. It is to embrace discipline not as restriction, but as liberation, not as limitation, but as the means by which the fragmented psyche is harmonized. In these worlds, the self is both grounded and expansive. It operates with clarity, resilience, and coherence. It navigates existence with a sense of purpose rooted in ethical alignment and integrated awareness. It recognizes the value of small victories, the necessity of repetition, and the significance of confrontation with resistance and shadow alike. It embodies discipline, patience, courage, and wisdom. It lives in a state of continuous conscious evolution, aware that wholeness is a dynamic, ongoing process, never static, never final, yet perpetually actualized through the engagement of mind, heart, and spirit. The finite worlds, therefore, are not separate from the lived experience of discipline, reflection, and integration. They are the natural consequence of sustained engagement with the self, the culmination of conscious effort to harmonize inner forces, and the unfolding of the psyche toward its fullest potential. They represent the horizon toward which every act of conscious choice, every confrontation with resistance, every engagement with shadow, and every disciplined repetition is directed. They are the living embodiment of wholeness in motion, the realized expression of a psyche that has learned to align, integrate, and act from the deepest levels of its own consciousness, bringing the individual into resonance with the eternal dynamic process of self-realization. And human evolution. The finite worldias are thus both destination and journey, structure and fluidity, discipline and freedom, shadow and light. They are the culmination of conscious effort and the beginning of continuous emergence. They are lived, embodied, and experienced through the daily engagement with self, through the refinement of action, thought, and reflection, and through the alignment of every aspect of the psyche with the overarching movement toward wholeness, integration, and the full actualization of human potential. Thanks for watching Living Jung.